She thought she could barge into my farm whenever she pleased. She thought her HOA rules were law, even on land they didn't own. But when Karen climbed my fence one too many times, I decided to give her a taste of real farm life, and justice finally caught up. My name is Daniel, and 3 years ago I walked away from my corporate job to live on a piece of farmland that had been in my family for generations. The land sat right outside a suburban neighborhood called Maplewood Estates, one of those cookie-cutter HOA developments where every mailbox looks the same, the grass can't grow half an inch too tall, and neighbors whisper if you hang the wrong color curtains. I wasn't a part of the HOA, never signed their contracts, never agreed to their rules. My property predated the entire development by 50 years. I checked and double-checked with the county before moving in just to be sure. I wanted a simple life with goats, chickens, a big vegetable garden, and fresh air. I thought I'd get that. What I didn't count on was Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of Maplewood Estates. Karen was the HOA president, and she ruled that neighborhood like it was her personal empire. 60 years old, tall, sharp-featured, always in pastel sweaters and pearls, she carried a clipboard everywhere like it was a royal scepter. Her husband barely spoke, always trailing behind her with his eyes on the ground, as though silence was the only way to survive living with her. The first time she came over, she didn't introduce herself or welcome me to the area. Instead, she handed me a letter, stamped with the HOA logo, demanding that I remove my chicken coop because it violated architectural guidelines. I told her politely that I wasn't part of her HOA. She frowned like I had just spoken blasphemy, then sniffed and told me everything I did affected property values. That was my first warning sign. The letters kept coming. One claimed my rooster's morning crow violated Maplewood's noise ordinance. Another demanded I screen off my compost pile because it was unsightly. She even sent one complaining that my heirloom tomato plants weren't on their approved vegetation list. Each time, I wrote back with documentation from the county, the Right to Farm Act, zoning maps, permits, all proving she had no authority over me. But Karen didn't take no for an answer. To her, rules weren't rules, they were weapons. When letters didn't work, she escalated to surveillance. I'd catch her standing on a ladder at dawn, peering into my yard with binoculars, scribbling notes on her clipboard. Soon after, she bought herself a drone. Every morning at 7 o'clock sharp, the buzzing of that machine filled the air as it hovered over my goats and chickens. The animals panicked. My goats bolted in circles, my chickens scattered in chaos, and my dog barked furiously until he was hoarse. I asked Karen to stop. She smiled coldly and told me she was conducting aerial inspections for boundary documentation. On the third morning, I introduced her drone to the high-pressure jet of my power washer. That drone went down like a rock. Karen screamed at me from the sidewalk and called the police, but when the deputy showed up, he told her that flying drones over private property was harassment. She fumed, but she wasn't done. Not even close. Trespassing became her next tactic. One afternoon, I came home from the farmer's market to find Karen inside my greenhouse, taking pictures of my tomato plants. She claimed she was checking for diseased crops that could spread to the community garden. I told her to get out before I called the sheriff. 2 weeks later, I caught her measuring my chicken coop at 5:30 in the morning with a tape measure, muttering about setback requirements. When I reminded her again that her HOA rules didn't apply to me, she sneered and said she had a fiduciary duty to protect property values. The third time, she brought back up. 3 HOA board members marched onto my farm with clipboards, snapping photos of my barn and feed storage as if they were EPA inspectors. That was the first time I called the police. Deputy Harris arrived, shook his head, and told them they were trespassing. They left, but not before Karen hissed at me that this wasn't over. I realized then that I needed evidence. I installed security cameras around the property, motion-activated floodlights, and no trespassing signs every 20 feet. I thought that might finally make her back off. I was wrong. The cameras caught her sneaking onto my farm at night with a flashlight, peering into compost bins, photographing the goat pen. At dawn, she'd appear again, snapping pictures of the chicken run. Sometimes she brought her nephew, an unemployed 20-something with a clipboard, whom she introduced as her environmental consultant. Together, they pretended to take soil samples and measure my barns. Each time, I called the police. Each time, Karen argued she had official HOA business. Eventually, the deputy suggested I get a restraining order. I filed for one, and the judge granted it, forbidding Karen from coming within 50 feet of my property. I thought, finally, she'd be forced to stop. But Karen only changed tactics. She switched to long-lens cameras, photographing my yard from the road. She hired a professional surveyor to check my boundary lines, praying to find something she could weaponize. She even tried convincing the county to classify my farm as a commercial enterprise, which would trigger different zoning rules. The county dismissed her claims. She was relentless. Her obsession had no off switch. Then came the breaking point. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with an alert from my security system. The cameras showed Karen climbing my fence with a ladder, 2 other women following her. They carried clipboards, containers, and measuring tapes. By the time I pulled up to my property, they were deep inside, walking through my garden like they owned it. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I watched on my phone as they reached the goat pen. Karen bent down, trying to photograph a goat's hooves while ranting about disease. That's when I saw my opportunity. Quietly, I walked to the pen. While they were distracted, I slipped the heavy latch shut. That goat pen was built to keep animals safe, 8-foot-high reinforced wire mesh, concrete footers, a roof to stop predators from climbing in. In other words, escape-proof. Perfect for goats. Or Karen. At first she didn't notice, too busy scribbling notes and snapping pictures. But when she tried to leave and found the gate locked, her face drained of color. She started shrieking. "You can't do this. This is false imprisonment. This is kidnapping." Her companions looked horrified, realizing they were trapped inside a goat pen. Meanwhile, my goats thought it was the most fun they'd had in months. My prized Nubian goat, Bella, tugged at Karen's designer handbag strap until it tore. Another goat nibbled on her shoelaces, sending her into a frenzy. Karen's pastel sweater was smeared with mud, her perfect hair full of hay, as she flailed around like she'd landed in the middle of a barnyard nightmare. I just pulled up a lawn chair, sipped my coffee, and called 911. Calm as could be, I told the dispatcher I had 3 trespassers detained on my property. When Deputy Harris arrived, he took one look at the scene, then looked at me, then back at Karen, screaming, smeared with mud, goats sniffing her shoes, and I swear I saw him bite his lip to keep from laughing. I handed him my phone, showing video evidence of them climbing the fence, wandering my property, and violating the restraining order. Karen's friends immediately started apologizing. They admitted Karen had told them she had permission to conduct an official HOA inspection. They swore they had no idea she was lying. Harris called for backup and informed them they were under arrest for trespassing. Karen doubled down, shouting about her rights as HOA president and how my farm was illegal. Harris shook his head, cuffed her, and led her to the patrol car while her companions hung their heads in shame. News of the arrest spread like wildfire. That evening, the local TV station ran a segment with footage from my security cameras, showing Karen climbing my fence. The headline read, "HOA president arrested after trespassing on farm, locked in goat pen." Neighbors lined up to give interviews, many embarrassed by her behavior, some even admitting they had been victims of her bullying for years. The next morning, her mugshot was all over Facebook, turned into memes with captions like, "When you take HOA rules too seriously." It went viral instantly. Karen was charged with trespassing, harassment, and violating a restraining order. Her 2 companions got plea deals for community service in exchange for testifying that Karen had misled them. During her trial, the prosecutor played months of footage I had collected, Karen sneaking in at night, harassing my animals, measuring barns. They even presented her ridiculous 50-page agricultural impact report, full of nonsense about my farm destroying property values. Neighbors testified about her bullying, recounting years of harassment over mailbox colors and flower choices. Her expensive lawyer argued she was protecting community standards. The jury didn't buy it. After 2 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty. The judge sentenced her to 90 days in jail, suspended to 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service at the local animal shelter, fittingly, and ordered her to pay me $15,000 in damages. But the real punishment came when the HOA board finally had enough. In a near-unanimous vote, they removed her as president and banned her from ever serving again. She broke down crying at the meeting, clutching her laminated HOA bylaws, screaming that property values would collapse without her. Security had to escort her out as neighbors sighed in relief. And me? I went back to my peaceful farm life. My goats munching hay, my chickens scratching in the dirt, my vegetables growing in peace. Every once in a while, I sit on my porch, sip my coffee, and think about the day Karen finally learned that boundaries matter. She thought she could rule my farm. Instead, she ended up in a goat pen, and the whole world got to watch.